Welcome to Once Was Media, a group deeply interested in the past, particularly places and events that have fallen out of public knowledge and interest. Our mission is to reintroduce our audience to these forgotten and neglected places and people, so their memory may live once again and resonate with the present. As has been said, the past is another country. It is all around us and ready to be explored. Let's begin. To discover the past of any place, a good place to begin is to become familiar with those people who created its history. We can do this by reading what they've written, studying the buildings they built, and considering the social institutions they created. Among those institutions are those that manage the treatment of the dead. As we will see, the past inhabitants of a land remain with us, although we may not be aware of them. Consequently, one of the easiest and most accessible ways of learning about previous generations is to become familiar with their burial practices. So, to begin to explore Cape Cod's past, let's look at one of the early settlers' most enduring legacies, their graves and graveyards. When the first English colonial settlers, the Pilgrims, arrived in 1620 and landed near Provincetown, the area was occupied by the Wampanoag tribe whose descendants still live on the Cape. Although the Pilgrims relocated to Plymouth, more colonists from England came and settled Cape Cod in the years that followed. Generally, settlers tried to live using the same culture and social practices they knew and adapted them as necessary to fit their new circumstances. Consequently, early colonial settlers on Cape Cod tried to use the same burial practices they had used in England, ideally burial in a graveyard associated with a parish church. We'll talk more about colonial graveyards in another video, but for now, let's focus on the characteristics of colonial graves. Historically, societies have traditionally marked the location of their buried dead, and so did the first colonial inhabitants of Cape Cod. Today, because we associate graves with headstones, we assume that all colonial graves were marked with headstones and with footstones, but this was not always the case. We typically think of a slate headstone as the archetypical early colonial marker, but professionally carved slate was expensive. The land of Cape Cod consists mostly of glacial sand and rocks, so suitable stone was scarce. Slate had to be imported and professionally carved, often at prohibitive cost. Given the limited materials and expense, colonists turned to alternatives. So, what were the alternatives? Wooden markers might list a name, dates, and family information. These markers were fragile and ephemeral, and I know of no surviving examples. Early deforestation of the Cape quickly made wood a diminishing resource. Sizable rocks could serve as headstones and footstones.
Although they often had no inscriptions, they marked the grave's location and helped prevent disturbance.
A grave marked by such means would be recognized and respected during this time, especially if it was in a graveyard associated with a church. We should note, however, that unless maintained, such markers eventually disappeared, and the graves were forgotten. Unmarked graves probably represent the greatest number of colonial-era burials on Cape Cod. Even where stones once existed, over time, many have since broken, fallen, and disappeared into the ground entirely. And depending upon the circumstances of the deceased, some graves may never have been marked at all. The remains of all who died on Cape Cod are still here. We simply do not know where they all are. Old Methodist Cemetery on Queen Anne Road in Harwich is one of the oldest in town. It was established in 1807. It stopped being used for new burials in 1979 because the church associated with it moved to South Harwich. The OMC contains several examples of the kinds of grave markers that typify colonial-era burials. Headstones with name, dates, details. Footstones. Rocks. Empty spaces, where markers once stood.
Or where Native Americans are buried, because colonial gravestones were not used by Native Americans, even those who had converted to Christianity, so their graves were often unmarked.
So that gives you a brief survey of the general history and types of colonial-era gravestones on Cape Cod.
In upcoming videos, we'll explore more of Cape Cod's earliest graves and burial sites, some tucked away in remarkably remote locations, as our journey and discoveries continue.